G'day guys, well welcome to a tutorial on how not to start a city in Cities Skylines. I might have been playing this game for a while now, but this is essentially the second city that I've built where I have had money enabled. The idea behind Sunset City is to have a big city from the very beginning. I went in with that mindset, and that is absolutely not the right mindset. You need to start small, and you need to start with humble beginnings and build up from there. Pastels 20 made some really poor decisions and decided to upgrade all of his roads to the most expensive roads possible, which means we are bleeding unnecessary money from the very beginning. And this episode is me trying to make amends, trying to figure out a way of getting a big successful city from the very beginning. Is it possible? Will this tangle of unnecessary expensive roads become a successful, thriving city, or have the actions of Pastels 20 screwed us beyond repair? Well, I mean, you've seen the thumbnail, but what I'm trying to say is that this took a lot of work, and it's definitely not the best way to start a city in Cities Skylines. But we get there in the end. The journey is full of mistakes and fails, with a couple of redeeming moments along the way. Let's dig in. Attempt number 1, I dive in recording a live play, thinking that I could explain the positioning of different services around the city and the different areas that I'm going to be zoning in today's episode. For example, one of the first things that I placed down is a natural gas power station. Now, natural gas is a great source of energy, but for Sunset City, based in the 80s, and also as a starting power station, is absolutely not the greatest of ideas. But in terms of placement, yeah, that's where the power station is going to sit, and for the water treatment facility, that is also the positioning of it, which is quite different to Miami, which has a lot of its water treatment facilities out on this island, which I don't think I'm going to do. I'm going to save the islands for Sunset City for other purposes. I have the audacity to align up the power poles with the light posts on the streets, and then I drag out the water pipes aligning up with the roads above. I dive into some zoning with a spring in my step and a carefree attitude, thinking that I've made some fantastic decisions. Once people started moving in, all money troubles would disappear and the city would just take care of itself. That's what I kept on telling myself. For zoning, we're keeping it mostly residential for now. The commercial districts are on the main roads and our industry is far off in the corner. I begin the task of planning out our districts, which are going to play a really important role for the growth of the city. We're using building themes mod, which means that we can create different building themes for each district. So placing out and figuring out where each district's going to go means that we can decide on the look of each area. I begin figuring out what each district is going to look like, and then I can assign each district with that type of building theme. Essentially creating 3 different types of districts and then selecting the different types of buildings that are going there: high density, medium density, and low density. And then I decided to rezone some areas depending on the types of buildings that I wanted to zone in those different parts of the city. And for the most part, the types of houses we're going to be seeing spawned in these areas are going to be high density, so a lot of apartments. I know that this is basically Miami 40 years ago, but in this version, a lot of the suburbs close to the city are going to be high density, a lot of apartments. I'm not really sure how accurate that is to Miami in the 80s, but judging from Google Earth at least, there is a lot of 70s and 80s architecture going on, so I can only assume that it was like this way in the 80s. With our districts now themed and our city ready to start spawning, I hit play and watch our residents start to move in, to then very quickly realize that they all need some water and to realize that we actually have no money to give them any water. So with a couple of loans under our belts, the city starts to take shape, and I can start adding in some extra services and some zoning so that the city has pretty much all that it needs, and I can just attend to the city as it starts to grow. If it needs more services, add more services. If we need more commercial, just add some more commercial. I'm using a lot of parking lots because these are great little parks and they are just providing a little bit of extra detail, which is something that I was also going for as we were working through this. Taking out the remaining loans, I placed down the services that the city needed and provided extra plumbing and electricity as the city needed it. But we eventually ran out of roads to zone and we ran out of money to play with, and we were at a stage where the city was just absolutely not going to make any sort of income. With citizens still moving in, the lack of services was eventually too much, and I decided that the best option was just to abandon ship and we'd try again, knowing exactly how I was going to make a profit in the next one. If only that was true. The second attempt was even more miserable than the first one. Not learning anything from prior mistakes, we built some more roads because, the city could use some more roads. The idea was to provide some extra zoning close to the services that the city already had, because the roads that we had further out were too far away to gain any of the benefits from the services closer to the city. But unfortunately, no amount of schools or basketball courts were going to save this attempt, because after running the simulation for a number of months, we were so far into the negative that there was no saving this attempt. But there was something here. I knew that this was going to work. It was just a matter of getting the right zoning and getting the right services, and we were going to pay for all these unnecessary roads. But it definitely wasn't in this attempt, so we abandoned ship and gave it another go. Attempt number 3, knowing full well that it's a road problem, but just being far too stubborn that I wanted to really try and make this work. It was just a matter of getting the right balance of services, spreading the love from the very beginning, zoning out on all these roads that we already have, and then as residents move in, yes, we're going to be in the negative, but as soon as we have all the people moved in and the services already in place, then hopefully we will start making some money. And you know what? This kind of worked. We started to make a little bit of cash for the very first time. I was stoked. I thought that we had this, but unfortunately, good things were not going to last because our industrial zone was letting us down. Our industrial road was letting us down because that's all it was. It was just the one road. And with vehicles not able to drive on the colourful roads and our landfill all in the same area, we were funneling a lot of traffic into this one road. And completely out of money and all of our loans already taken, we were forced into having to restart yet again. Fourth and final attempt, because this is the time that finally worked. I revert back to a save before we had our natural gas power station and placed down a coal power station, one of the cheaper options. I create more zoning for our industrial area and provide more points of access so that we're not just funneling all our traffic into the one road. I convert back a couple of unnecessary roads to some planning roads so we're not paying any money on them, providing just the bare bones of services, schools, parks, police stations, fire stations. I hit play and the city begins to grow. Knowing full well that we're not going to make any money for the first few months, we inevitably go bankrupt, and I take out a couple of extra loans so that we can provide some more services. After a little bit of time has passed, we start to make a little bit of money, and I feel confident enough to start expanding into some other areas, upgrading some of these roads, and zoning out some new spots for the city to start growing. I also expand onto Dodge Island as we do need a little bit of extra space for some industrial zoning. We need to provide the city with some extra industrial services, such as landfill and electricity and anything else that could fit onto this island. I want to be pretty consistent with the way that Sunset City expands, and this is always going to be an industrial area, so I do want it to be industrial from the get-go. So starting with some landfill over here and some industrial zoning is a great start. But despite the extra landfill, I realized that our rubbish situation is becoming a little bit dire. And this time it's because of our main road, which is becoming pretty clogged with traffic. With one main road heading towards our big industrial zone and into our city, we're seeing a lot of trucks, rubbish trucks, being stuck in traffic and not getting to the places it needs to. My first solution is to expand into some other areas closer to the city and provide some recycling centres so that we've got some alternative areas for rubbish to be collected. And then I also add an extra main road so that we've got different ways for people to get to our industrial zone. And with that, our rubbish situation is much better, but the traffic flow on this main road is still pretty bad. So I decided to go in and do a little bit of tweaking. With Traffic President mod, I changed some of the connections with some of these roads so that there's no longer traffic lights here, and instead it's just a stop sign, and cars that are traveling into these roads are no longer able to cross the main road, which then means vehicles traveling on this main road are no longer stopping at every single intersection, and vehicles that are trying to cross this main road can just use some of the larger roads that are connected up. And with that, I continue the expansion into some of these colourful roads, reclaiming some of these roads and starting to zone up a little bit more of these places. And I realised that we are generating enough money to repay our loans to be completely debt-free and Sunset City well and truly on its way to actually becoming a city. Now that we're making a little bit of money, I wanted to go through and just add the smallest of detail to some of these areas. And by detail, I mean just organizing the houses and organizing the buildings that are going to be down here. Now, the majority of this place is going to be zoned out, and I like the idea that these places can change over time. But I do want to make a little bit of variation in some of the things that are down in these areas because, well, in Cities Skylines, if you just zone and kind of just call it a day, then you tend to have cities that look, well, I mean, pretty similar and looking very unrealistic. And the reason why is because you're just going to have buildings and houses that are just going to be spawning in these places, and you're not really going to have a huge amount of control, even with Building Themes mod. That gives you a little bit of control, but it doesn't give you a huge amount. So I want to go through and just change up some of the areas that we've got down here. For starters, I'm working on some public housing. This is sitting pretty close to the city and is going to be an area that is mostly going to be apartment blocks. I'm going to be doing quite a lot of these sort of areas. You can't really zone these areas out. You have to go in and place them down manually, which is totally fine because they're actually super easy to make because the houses do look super similar. The apartments look really similar. Then you can just essentially find the same types of buildings and place them down in rows and blocks, and then adding in some recreation like some basketball courts or a playground and just some simple paths, and that's pretty much it. And these areas turn out looking pretty similar to how they look in real life. And I am just going through and using the ploppable Rico mod, which pretty much allows me to make the population way more realistic and more accurate as well. Otherwise, a lot of these buildings that I'm placing down, I'm pretty sure these would be parks otherwise, or they might even be unique buildings. Whereas with that mod, I am able to place down these buildings and they will have a population living in there, which is awesome because that's exactly what I want. But it just creates a little bit of variation to some of these areas. And I plan to do this with a lot of the areas around Sunset City. We're going to be zoning quite a lot, but then I'll be going through and adding in those details or just adding in slightly different types of city planning and city development rather than just having zoned areas, because you just don't really get the same type of thing going on if you're just zoning out a whole city, which is also why I'm going through and plopping down my own apartment blocks just in these areas, just seeing what I can create, just getting a bit of a sense of what sort of details and just atmosphere, Miami atmosphere, I guess. I was trying to find as many thin and long apartment blocks with orange rooftops as possible, and there's a fair few on the workshop, but it's kind of crazy that the ones that were working the best were the ones from Sydney, which is where I live, and they're actually super similar to ones in Miami, so I was able to use a bunch of them in this area, which I really didn't expect to be using. As we're going through and increasing the population, I also wanted to add in some services, some of which I am just placing down, but others I am putting in just the smallest amounts of detail. For instance, this high school that I've placed down, I have also including a track and field, which is connected to the high school, but it's providing more land value to this area as well as these basketball courts. And look, it's the smallest amount of detail. I think the most that I put in are a couple of paths and yeah, just some concrete brush and just, I don't even know if I had some trees at this point. I think we're leaving the trees till last. Fences, and that's it. We're calling it a day. It's really just some simple stuff. I am way more interested in just the big picture stuff at this stage. We'll get to the detailed areas a little later on, but for now, we're just focusing on land value, we're focusing on traffic, we're focusing on just getting the city established. And it's mostly to do with residential, which is what we're back to doing. We're figuring out what some of the suburbs are going to look like because we're sticking to a Miami 80s sort of style. I needed to find some buildings that kind of fit that. So what I'm doing here is I'm scrolling through Find It, and I'm using the tag feature to tag any houses that I think are perfect for that type of neighborhood. And I'm also trying to find houses that are, similar shape, similar size, they work well together. And, as you can see, I found a fair few that I liked. And with that tag now, I can go through some of these suburbs and I can just create just some more interesting looking areas. Now, I don't really plan to do this for all of them. I don't plan to do this for most of the suburbs in Sunset City, but it is super handy for certain areas that, well, maybe I need a little bit more detail down there, or I just need to, add in a couple of houses to make it look the part. These are great as well because once you place them down, they are historical, but I do have to be a bit careful because we are playing with land value, and if I place them down in the wrong places, if they have too high a land value and, well, they require a high land value and it's pretty low, well, it's not going to work. So just got to be a bit careful about that. But you also might notice that it's looking, it's starting to get there, but it's not looking that great in certain areas. Well, it's the lack of trees. I don't really have any trees down because I have, a whole bunch of custom buildings, custom houses, and they generally come with vanilla trees, and I don't want any vanilla trees. So I've disabled that, and I'm going to be placing down trees a little later, and man, that really changes the way everything looks. And speaking of changing the way everything looks, I really love when placing down services such as schools, because they are so big, they just change the way the blocks look so much. So I am trying to just change certain blocks, trying to space out where blocks are really broken up, where you can see roads have been either demolished or removed or changed the way that they sort of operate to cater for parks or cater for schools. And I kind of like the way that happens, and I really enjoy creating that over time and seeing how that changes over time, which is something that I think is going to be really fun about Sunset City, because we're kind of just zoning up a bunch of these areas now. We're going to be changing a lot of these blocks and a lot of these places as we go on. And I just think that when you look at a city and see all the different shapes in the roads and all the different types of places that are down here, I don't know, for me, I just like to think about what's influenced those changes and why they look that way, and what was it looking like before, and when was that built? All those sort of things really fascinate me. But with Miami, I really love these, they've got so many of these types of neighborhoods. All the houses look the same, windy roads. It is just it's a real scene going on, and I just wanted to try and capture that. And I wanted to just give it a little crack. This is definitely not, this is just the first try at this, really. I'm always really bad at building these neighborhoods too. I think that because they are designed to really use the space as best as possible, I think that it's always hard to get the first time round. So I'm going to go back to those areas and give it a go. But another thing is that they are quite expensive to place down because they are Rico buildings. Well, yeah, they're really expensive. So I'm just going to put a pin on that and we're going to come back to it. And the great thing about building all these areas early on in the series is that we can figure out what some of these areas are going to look like, but because we're not putting in huge amounts of detail, we're mostly just zoning, it won't be such a huge deal to change them up later on down the track. For instance, we're more focused on figuring out where some of these places are going to sit and a little bit of the road layout, and then later on we can go through and change how some of the places look. And that's super different to how I usually play the game. Originally, I would detail these places up quite a lot or spend a lot more time working on them, and then when it comes to making any sort of changes, I'm less likely to do it because I've already spent so much time building some of these suburbs. Whereas this way, I'm way more open to coming back and changing. In fact, I already want to come back and change a whole bunch of things. But I am really enjoying the roads that we are building, and I am just trying to take inspiration from different areas of Miami and, place them down with the context of Sunset City. It's a little hard because Sunset City is way, 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 way smaller than Miami, but trying to figure out where they fit within the city and getting an idea of the scale of this city is really, really interesting. And trying to just mix up the types of suburbs, even if it's just some slight variations, like some curvy roads or some back alleys. It's it's a sort of thing where it's just a bit of trial and error and figuring out where things go. And like I said, because we're not putting huge amounts of work into it, it's not a big deal to come back and change some things. And as we push forward and work on the residents of Sunset City, I make sure to place down as much education as the city needs and other services, and just figuring out where they sit within the context of the road layout. Trying to find places that are less gridded and find places that have got more space so that I can detail or add some parks or add in some, extra bits and pieces. I always try to find areas that are not going to be the easiest to zone or not going to be the easiest to fill, and that are slightly larger than some of the other parts of the grid. And I think that's just one of the benefits of having a very unconventional grid layout. You do just find some of those areas that are, much larger than other spots on the grid, and they make for perfect parks or for some schools or for some other bits and pieces that would otherwise, if you were just to zone them up, it would be a little bit hard or look a bit awkward. Whereas when you place down something that takes up even more extra space, then they work really well. Zoning out some commercial on the main roads and continuing the grid a little closer to the interchange, which is as far to the right-hand side of the city as we're going to develop in this episode. I continue working back towards the swampland, and I am noticing the city is really starting to develop up quite nicely. We've got 11,000 and we are pushing for that 15,000 mark. And everything was really starting to work out. We were making good money, the population was rising, and the way that the roads were working, I was really happy playing with some different types of road layouts. But apart from all that, there was something that was starting to really bug me about the development of Sunset City, and that was the types of houses that were being spawned. And using Building Things mod is going to really help me out in this situation. And it had already helped me out quite a lot, finding the types of houses, at least a similar style to what I wanted. And granted, there are definitely some houses that I need to deselect and not use within the context of Sunset Cities. They're just not going to work. But there are some houses that are super close, but just not perfect. They just need a little bit of tweaking. And the original idea was to go through and add in my own trees manually and add in some fences just here and there, just as some little extra details. But I think that it's still not going to be the answer that I'm looking for. I'm trying a couple of things where I'm increasing the land value so that I am seeing more of the houses that I want in Sunset City because they are, either level 3 or level 4, and the area that I am zoning up at the moment is, starting at the very bottom, there's nothing really around here, so they're not going to be a level 3 or 4 for quite a while. And I don't mind that, but it does mean that there are a bunch of houses that are already at different levels that I would like to see, but I would like them to be all the same level because I like that style for that particular area. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically I am not able to see the houses being grown in the areas that I want. They lack a lot of detail and they lack a lot of the vibe that I'm going for. It's just really not there. So what's the answer? Well, I believe the best option is to go into Asset Editor and edit these houses myself and create the types of detail that I want to see in Sunset City. Add in the palm trees out the front, the fences and the hedges and the detail that I want, even changing some of the rooftop variables so they're a little bit more orange. And there's also a bunch of apartments and houses that I'm subscribed to that I don't think fit Sunset City, not quite how I thought they were going to. So I'm going to unsub from them. So basically what I'm trying to say is don't get too used to the way that Sunset City looks because all this is going to change over the next couple of episodes, which was exactly the point of this episode. Basically to bump up the population to that 15,000 mark, which we hit, and change things up, fix up the traffic, fix up some of the services, and definitely fix up some of the houses. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode of Sunset City. I hope you've enjoyed it. Next week, slightly different type of video. We're going to be looking at how I built the wetlands and just giving you a little bit of an idea of what went into building over there and just showing you around because I don't think I've really done that yet. Big thanks to the people over on Patreon who are supporting the channel. Greg Rosenbing, Impulse Music, Valeria, Terry Groff, Namir Khan, Andrew May, Chris Jones, Keith Hoffman, Shay Stanton, Samuel Breton, Costard Lucian, and Electric Bill. Thank you guys so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!